Welcome to Critical Café,
Join us as we chat about the latest episode,
the campaign as a whole, and Critical Role in general.
all while we partake in a delicious cup of coffee. So grab yourself a tasty beverage
Settle into your favorite cozy spot.
and get ready for a little geek philosophy. Welcome to Critical Cafe Live. We are back 2 days in a row this week because we're going to be talking about the first episode of Candela Obscura. We didn't get a chance to talk about this before. We were holding off until they released the video, but here we are. So my name's Brian, and with me, as always, is Crystal.
Hi.
And so, yeah, and tonight we're going to dive into it. We're going to talk about it. I know we've got about 56 minutes or so until they go to episode 2. So if this is the first time you're watching, to kind of get caught up before you start your second episode in, welcome. If you have already watched it and you just want to add to the chat, please do so when we get to the chat. There's no critical recap for this. Maybe Danny Carr will do this later on, but for now, we're going to go with my notes that I have just to kind of keep us on track. I'll share those as we go, and then we'll jump over to the chat like we normally do. So if there's anybody that has to speak up or wants to speak up to add something to the conversation, please do. If you're catching this on a replay, you can still catch up with the chat. Just add to the comments in the video. So, yeah, let's dive in, shall we?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of go through the notes here, and I'll, you stop me when we get to a point where you want to talk, but I'll try to find a natural stopping point as we go. The one thing I do want to say, we'll find out more, or we'll talk more about the cast as we go through the episode, but just right off the bat, we've got a really good cast of players this time. We've got Laura playing Arlo Black, which we'll find out as we go. We've got Anjali Benmani, who we know from the channel or from Critical Role from a lot of different circumstances. She is amazing, playing Charlotte Eves. We've got the one and only Robbie Damon, who we know and love from a lot of different things, but especially from Campaign 3 of Critical Role, playing Howard Margrove. We've got Ashley Johnson playing Augie James. And then our Lightkeeper / Game Master is Matt Mercer. So, we're in good hands as far as the DM goes, or the GM in this case. We talked a little bit about Candela Obscura last time about like sort of what the setting was like, but maybe before I even jump into the notes, anything to say like about the feel of this even before they got started with, they're in full costumes with this. They're not like, the normal regalia. Sometimes they do full cosplay for the other things, but this is kind of jumping right off the bat with a new set, new costumes. It kind of gave a good feeling from just jumping right in, right?
Yeah. And what I thought was really cool is that even with their character artwork, their costumes are spot on. So there was definitely a lot of planning that went into what they were wearing, trying to, stylize their characters, and then also combining the artwork so that you get a very good cohesive feel for, what the character, kind of what they're going for. But yeah, it's kind of spooky, it's kind of grungy. I think we talked about when we did our last episode, just kind of introducing the game system. We talked about how like the city is kind of enrobed by these magical, machines that keep back the bad entities, so to speak, or the
Right.
horror, and so all of these guys are all in the same city, and it's very, the lighting is set, the whole everything is, it lends for a lot of like suspense and maybe jump scare a little bit, so it's good.
It's funny, like I joke with Crystal about this all the time. Like, there's so much that Critical Role does that aligns with what we kind of do with our home game quite a bit. And so I'm like, oh, they're doing this now. Like, and it's not me complaining that they're doing it, but it's always like, great minds think alike. You have similar
Mhm.
ideas, and no matter what I do, if I ever publish anything that we did for our home game, it's always going to be compared to, well, they're just ripping
Yeah.
off Critical Role. But I promise, we
No
have
original
like,
ideas, you
yeah, yeah,
know?
exactly. Like we've come to the same idea about things, and one of the things that I like about this, and I actually use this in our D&D, our 5e campaign, is I love the fact that the level of not necessarily, I mean, I guess technology, but also just the feel of it is like 1900s, 1800, 1900s our time, where like um, the dress is very like much of that era. Like it's almost an analog of our world, but there's magic
Right.
and there's other things going on. And I
Monsters.
almost have that for my regular D&D campaign, in addition to all the other swords and sorcery and stuff like that. So it's really cool to see it in this light. And so yeah, so when they start out, and a good example of this is just you've got a 19-year-old character named Augie James, who was doing his rounds of delivering papers, which kind of sets you in the mood for the time span of which this analog world is. And he actually ends his night at one of his friends, older guy named Donald, and Donald Kinzel is in the Steel District of New Fair, and he kind of hence it, and that's the city. New Fair is the city that's there, and he's sort of a friend of his, and he kind of sees him in the evening as he's winding down and just kind of checking in on him to see how he's doing. But during that conversation, Donald is adding charcoal to the furnace. Again, it kind of elicits like that feel, almost like a Peaky Blinders esque, like
Yeah.
vibe to it, right? And one of the pieces of charcoal that he adds to the furnace is unique, and Augie kind of notices that. But when he adds it in, huge explosion, and it throws Augie out of his body, like his spirit kind of gets pushed outside of the body, almost like that scene, if you have seen the Doctor Strange movie where the Ancient One hits him and it like pulls him out of his body and he sees things, because it's sort of that type of vibe to me. But then from there he sees this shadowy figure that's kind of coming from the furnace before he falls unconscious. And yeah, so kind of a big opening there. Maybe we should just
Right.
stop to see
Yeah.
how, what are we thinking about just the way everything opened.
Well, here's this kid, the end of his paper route,
Yep.
stopping in to see, this older man who is, a retired worker, um, probably has the black lung because he's coughing. You can tell he's kind of frail. He's, it's, you could tell they're in a very poor part of town. And he is checking in with this guy who he kind of feels like doesn't really have anybody else. I mean, I think the man even mentions this, that his daughter's going to be coming into town in the next week or two to
Right.
visit, and
Yeah.
so he's there by himself. And so Augie's checking on him at the end of his route and thinking, I'll stop in and talk to old Donald, for a little bit and catch up, make sure he's okay, and then head on my way. When out of the blue, they're trying to stay warm. They're around the furnace or the fireplace, and he throws a piece of charcoal in and it just blows everything up. And it's weird that Augie's he's still conscious to an
Yeah.
extent. Like his soul or something sees himself, feels like it's going out of his body and
Yep.
then back and then unconscious. So it's a really big opener. I mean, they're talking just a few minutes before this thing like blows up and you're like, what just happened? And then the scene flips, so
Yeah, and not only like the scene flipping, but it's almost like it's letting us know right off the bat, like here's how this is playing out, right? Like
yeah,
I don't know, it's a cool
drama right
uh
away.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um we've got oh, I did see, and I brought you in for a second there, Harry. Good evening to you as well. For some reason, this is just my system not working. Let me see if I can. There we go. that was your old one, which is from last.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that is, but good evening to you. So
Yes.
for
Hello,
some
hello.
reason, it didn't. There we go. Now we've got another one coming in. Hey, Crystal. So we'll test
That
it
was
maybe the next
me.
time. Yeah, yeah. So maybe the next time it comes through. Sorry, live show everybody, but I just want to make sure that the
Me, me,
comments
me,
can
me,
pop in.
me.
So it was a setting on my side. But yeah, so it was really like sort of a great way to like what do they call it? They it's almost like the James Bond start where like you think things are going okay and like things are going, then boom, action. It's like big
Yeah,
explosion
yeah,
and everything else. So it was kind of a cool way to kick things off, I thought. um
yes. It
so yeah, so
definitely
that's
instantly gets you engaged.
totally so yeah, so then, you know, while this is happening, meanwhile, in the Briar Green district, there's a middle-aged professor, Howard Margrove, working on his writing, and another professor expresses concern over how Howard is becoming more reclusive, and he says, "Hey, why don't you come out?" But he declines that, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, another time." Um, and then there is, another man that kind of shows up in a navy jacket and a fedora, and kind of delivers an envelope, and it reveals that Candela Obscura has requested his presence at the diner. So we're getting those vibes of like the secret organization sending out the message, summoning them to a meeting, which is pretty great. And then
Yep.
there's Arlo Black, who's a young woman, and she's also interrupted by the same guy who relays a similar message saying, "Hey, you need to meet with us at the diner." So, yeah, pretty interesting, like how they're getting the information around. Arlo says, "Hey, Mr. Telbrook, notify her mother," and leaves to go to the diner. So that's sort of the summoning of the other cast members, so to speak. And then Charlotte Eves, who's the owner of the Sight Unseen Bar and Club in the Red Lamp, receives, again, same invitation, same guy, and we're starting to pull everything together. When, on the other side, when Augie wakes up, um, it's sort of, the whole place is now frosted over. It's ice everywhere. And there's investigators that are coming in. And so one of the field officers there, Aaron Weimer from the Office of Unexplained Phenomenon, the
The
OUP,
OUP.
uh, yeah, introduces himself and says, "Hey, Donald was actually killed in this explosion." Obviously, a big, gut punch to Augie. Um, so yeah, so this is where, but he sort of explains it away as a hallucination. There was a fungal infection, and that's why Augie saw what he saw. Um, and so it is what it is with that. Like you can kind of tell something's at work. Then a woman, Alexandra Elise O'Neill, approaches Augie and says, "Hey, we're a little suspicious about the OUP," and extends sympathy for Donald, and basically is saying, "Hey, we understand how you feel, but." Um, Alexandra sort of says, "Hey, trust your own thoughts in this. Trust what you see, and why don't you come to the diner and we'll talk more." And so that's kind of how the beginnings of all this getting everybody together come into play. So let me
Yeah.
jump back over. Uh, got a few other. Hey, evening, great. Good to
Yes.
see everybody in. Let's see
Yeah,
if we can
yeah.
get every. Awesome. Oh, and sorry that emojis aren't showing up on this. Sorry, everybody.
Oh,
But yeah,
that's okay.
um, yeah. Sorry, it's not working on me. But welcome. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you have thoughts as you go through, hopefully you guys have seen this too. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Okay, so we're pulling, we're assembling the team through
Yes.
story,
Right.
um, and they're finally, getting to the point where they're going to head to the diner.
Right. So we've met Augie. We had conversation between him and Donald, and then we flash to Arlo, we flash to Charlotte, we flash to Howard, and then we flash back to Augie waking up and getting told by this group, the OUP, that Donald's dead, but also what he saw wasn't what happened, and that he was hallucinating because of some fungal something that has happened in the steel district. And so as that person who's talking to her kind of or he walks away, or him walks away, this other person kind of comes out from around the corner and says, hey, they're suspicious. Don't listen to them. Listen to your own gut and what you saw. And if you want to know more, meet us here at this diner. Right? Like,
Yep.
Okay, let's go.
I mean, I'd go to the diner.
I would too.
Yeah. So,
and the adventure begins.
So let's go to the diner. So yeah, at the diner, this is where Alexandra takes the time to introduce Augie to Howard and Arlo and Charlotte, before kind of explaining the mission, which is to go investigate those very same phenomena that Augie has experienced. But she further explains the flare, the magical energy. This is what Crystal was talking about earlier. That is sort of, been seeping into the world, but also it has consequences. If it affects you, it's known as the bleed, right? So Alexandra uses a detector to find some residue on Augie, and Charlotte kind of helps contain it. But this also affects Arlo, and it's sort of it also lets us know that there's something else going on with that whole interaction. And then Howard kind of says, wait a minute, what's going on here? Let's not mess with
well, yeah, because I think at that point Alexandra kind of touched it. Yep. And he's like, no, don't touch it. You know that's going to have a bad effect, so.
Yes. But again, like it's almost like, I almost felt like it was a little bit of a compulsion to go for it. Yeah. So interesting. And then Alexandra kind of like sets the tone. What is Candela Obscura? It's that we're trying to protect people from magical threats and all these incursions from this other realm. And then, Augie kind of says, if I'll try to do this, right? I'll join in with this. So the four of them now are a circle. And we talked about this in our video explaining how this game works. But basically it's like, here's the group, right? And the circle is the ones that are investigating these missions, and they get sent on them. So they're the circle of the Vassal and the Veil, which we'll find out later when they actually name, I believe, is when they name it. And they're supposed to locate and contain whatever this entity was that was apparently unleashed from that piece of coal, right? That's what we are thinking at this point in the story it is. So they head back to Donald's apartment, and they start to interact with Donald's ghost, who's, and then learning that Layla Oren's a scavenger that Augie knows sold that piece of charcoal or whatever it was to Donald in the first place. So they say, let's go find Layla. And she was at the Clara house, and I think they knew that to begin with. So they head to South Soffit to go find Layla and find out more. So interesting stuff there. And also it's kind of like nodding that maybe there's a little bit more of the group knows each other than they think, but that's not really evident yet. They're just kind of like teasing that out a little bit. So I thought that was really, interesting way of showing the group dynamics a little bit.
Well, and I think that Charlotte, Anjali's character, expresses concern about Augie joining because of how young they are, and they don't think that he should be drawn into the world and how dangerous it is. And I think, Augie makes the comment that they're already in it because they just had this big explosion, and how come, he didn't die, but Donald died. So there wasn't too much fuss. There was just a little bit of a lodge of a complaint of, hey, he's too young. He's too young to already start into this field type thing. But they got over that. They formed their little group, and then they set off to go to Donald's to kind of try to figure out what's gone on. And when they get there, Donald's ghost is just hanging out. They can just see him. He's hanging out in the apartment. It's still colder, I think. And they're able to talk to him a little bit, but then he starts almost approaching and almost like trying to latch on, and he keeps talking about how cold he is. You're so
Yeah.
warm. You're so warm. He keeps drifting towards them, like, I need to be warm, or,
Well,
so.
and that's sort of like the interesting part, right? Like that the whole place was like encased in ice, and it came from this, and the furnace was like doused and all that stuff. So there's this
Yep.
relationship between whatever this entities are and the ghosts and
Yeah.
heat sources and things like that. So
But
yeah.
thankfully, they're able to get from the ghost who gave him the coal. And Augie knows the girl, Clara, because they both are kind of like, orphans on the street who just kind of sleep wherever and take whatever little odd jobs. And apparently this Clara has bullied her a little bit in the past, but she knows where she's at, she thinks. So
He
they
thinks
set off and
August.
go, or yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Ashley is playing Augie. And
Yes.
so I'm interchanging their pronouns. Sorry.
Nope.
He
I do
thinks.
that too. Sorry about that. Yep. Yeah. So let's keep
Yep.
seeing what
Let's go
happens
find
with
Clara.
this trip to see Clara. So Augie, basically, like you said,
Oh, Clara House.
knows
Sorry.
who Clara is. So says, "Hey, wake up, Layla," and you know, kind of middle of the night, wake up somebody. There's something going on there, right?
Right.
So they're a little wary, but then warms up when Charlotte offers money and a job prospect because of her station. Um, and then Layla reveals that she got the two peculiar pieces of charcoal from Old Fair ruins, and so one was sold to Donald and the other to the Evanok Foundry. So now they've got another lead on where this other piece might be, knowing that there's a second one. And so that's kind of where they're going. And then again, we've got some rolls happening here and there as we play. The rolling of this stuff is different than when we're playing D&D or 5e. They're rolling with like a dice pool and seeing how many successes they have, how many partials, and sometimes it works, but then there's something else that happens. Sometimes it doesn't work, and there's other consequences. So it's interesting to kind of see how it's playing out while they're trying to negotiate things and stuff like that. So then they head to the Steel, which is the place where the foundry is, and they notice that the police are removing frozen bodies from a nearby building, and there's no OUP there currently. So yeah, so let's pause there for a second, and then
Okay.
kind of see where we are with this. So this is they head over to the place, then they notice what's going on. What are you taking away from how this is playing out so far?
Well, it sounds like these two pieces of charcoal that were taken, and kind of whenever the city was explained by Matthew, it sounds like, there's old fair and new fair. So you almost have this area that is the older part of the city that people don't really go to anymore. It's roped off. You're not supposed to go, but we
Mm-hmm.
find out that a lot of people who are orphans or unfortunates living on the street will go through and try to scavenge stuff to sell. Even if they sell it at a lower price, they're still making money because they found it, in Old Fair. But they definitely know it's not safe, and they're taking the risk of doing that. But to them, I guess, the money outweighs the risk when you don't really have somewhere to lay your head at night.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's what Layla did. Layla went and scavenged down into Old Fair, found these chunks of charcoal, and proceeded to, or charcoal in general, but two pieces were weird, and proceeded to sell them to whoever she could sell them to. So one went to Donald, and then one went to this foundry. Um, and so, the group already gets over there, and they're already pulling out like frozen bodies and things. So whatever magic it is freezing cold and, explosive, I think, once the charcoal gets heated up. So,
Yeah, and I think it's also like it's interesting to see how because this is the fun part about not knowing how things work. Like a lot of times we're watching them with Critical Role main campaigns, and when someone finds a certain thing or casts a certain spell, we know how that works. Or when we see a monster, most of the time we're like, okay, I know what this is. One of the fun things about this series is that with this game we don't know. It's not that we don't know the rules, we've read the rules, but it's like, because it's a little bit looser, like we don't know what these creatures are, what they do. It's not
Right.
just like armor class and hit points. This is a whole different system. So I find it to be, almost more compelling in some ways, to like, it draws you in more trying to figure out what these things are, because I can't put experience behind it to go, well, I think it's probably this creature, but I don't know. Like I have no clue what they're doing. So it's fun in a lot of ways for people that are experienced role players that have a lot of experience in one game to step into a new one and just kind of take the
Yeah.
story for what's
Yeah.
unfolding. So
Yeah. And and obviously these chunks of charcoal are housing
mhm.
entities somehow, which again, not your standard D&D game, so we have no clue what these, like you said, what these entities might be. We just know that
Yeah.
they make everything frozen and they knock people's spirits out of them,
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, we don't even know, like, why did Donald show up? Is it normal for a spirit to show up, or is it
Yeah,
only when they're affected? Like, yeah, it's kind of a cool, like, way to bring you into what's going
right.
on. So, um, okay, so they're at the steel, and then they're at the foundry. They also encounter a couple workers that have steel burns, and they mention that there was a steam explosion that happened. Um, Arlo can't find another entrance, uh, so
We have a
she
lot of
tries
bad
to.
rolls at this point.
Yes. So, and this is where she tries to like get the truck and drive the vehicle into the building, I think, to get in, right? And so,
Yeah.
she gets injured doing that, trying to break through the window. But then inside the foundry, they find other victims. They're like frozen in mid-action, and there's also this cold entity that's feeding off of heat, but also body heat and life. So Alexandra uses a piece of charcoal to contain this entity eventually, but it requires a blood activation. So Augie volunteers to make the blood sacrifice. Um, the activated charcoal kind of gets the attention of whatever this entity is, and then they're able to pull it inside and trap it. And then once it's there, the foundry and the victims gradually start returning to normal, and the spirits of the dead start returning to their bodies. And so, yeah, this is kind of how it goes. And then toward the end of this scenario, it's Alexander offering a celebration meal to the circle, but everyone is kind of like, we can't do it tonight. So um, they end up going to a safe house that's located in a bookstore, which is also another kind of sign of the type of game that we're playing, where we've got like a safe house location, a cover business that's hiding the location of one of the Candela Obscura circles. And so Alexander congratulates them on a successful mission, and then says, hey, there's more stuff to come. Here's more things that we need to do. Again, there's 3 episodes in this chapter. So, we'll. She kind of offers, hey, continue working with the group. Augie says, not sure about this, but we'll see how it goes. But Alexandra here says, thanks for the help, and you have a room at the Gilded Rainbow, this bookstore, no matter what. Like, we've got you a rent-free
Yeah.
room here, which is pretty great. And then, you know, there's a few other things that happen toward the end of here. I'll kind of jump back over to the chat, because yeah, it's just a cool way for this kind of to go into place. So, what are you thinking about, like, how this ended up?
Well, It's just a comedy of errors in some way. Laura's character Arlo somehow got left outside and can't get into the building. So she decides to steal or to hotwire a vehicle and to ram it into the building to see if she because she's tried numerous ways to get in and she can't get in. And so she's just backing it up and hitting the building. And it doesn't work. And she ends up injuring herself a little bit, which in this game it's you're taking bleeds and you're taking trauma and you're taking things like that. And so she's still out in the truck. Meanwhile, everybody else is inside like Ghostbusters, throwing
Right.
down a blood activated charcoal and sucking in this thing and sealing it in,
Yep.
um at least Anjali, her character Charlotte, kind of knew what to do, how to contain it. Because I was really I'm like, okay, well, how are you going to actually wrangle this thing? Okay, it came out of this, but was the charcoal destroyed? Is there even the ability to retrap the entity back into it? But we figured out they were able to, and
Yeah.
Augie bled on the. Apparently, like looking at the charcoal, there's runes all on it, and that's how it varies to just regular plain charcoal pieces. It's oddly shaped and it has a lot of runes on it. So apparently, some of the runes must be, runes that trap or runes that hold an entity. So they got it back inside, and then they're like, "Whew, okay, that's done." They get out, and Arlo's just in the vehicle, like, I hit the building, like I hurt my arm. So
Yep.
it was just it was a really good fight, but they were struggling a little bit with some of their roles. But all in
Yeah.
all, they achieved the goal, which was to find the entity and to contain it. So in my thoughts, there were the two pieces of charcoal, right? How was there not two entities? Like two entities didn't get released, just one entity got
See,
released.
see, that was what I was thinking too. Like, I thought that the entity that got Donald is still at large, or it went to the other foundry, but the foundry one was there already. So I feel like there's still one out there, unless we're
Or
just missing something.
maybe the charcoal was one piece at one point and got broken in half, and once they both got burned, the one entity was released at Donald's. Eh.
Maybe, or the other thing is it that it contained an entity inside of it, or did the charcoal going into the heat and rupturing open break open of like a veil and something creeped through,
Right.
like
Yeah.
instead of it being inside. I want to say that you're right, that it like was contained in there, but I guess we'll see. Like there's so
Yeah.
many ways this can go. I feel like, because of the nature of this game, where the story is sort of unfolding even more so than in a natural 5e game, because you have to describe, like, you don't just succeed or fail, you succeed and you fail and there's always more to it. So it kind of,
Right.
you can do that with any role-playing game, but I think it's baked into the rule set here, which is similar, like we said, to games like Blades in the Dark and things like that, which they've all,
Yeah.
even in the quick start guide, it acknowledges, yes, we know that there are some things that we were influenced by. So I like the way that this is going so far, because I think the story is matching the rule system really well. um, but yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe there is that second one still out there, and they've got to track it down and figure out, what they're gonna do about it. So,
Yeah.
I also think that, like, there's something to the narrative mechanic, because we were about to talk about it, but I think, like, where they do the follow up at the end, right? Like that they did that, but then they all have ways that they're supposed to spend their resources, and they get awarded things at the end and stuff, and it's
Yeah.
narratively baked in. So they all had their own things that they were doing at the end of this. So what did you think about that, like being baked into the system and the game? Like,
I thought it was really cool, because I'm a big fan of like, what are you doing in your downtime? What are you
yeah,
doing? Are you crafting? Are you working on a profession? Are you, like, are you what are you doing with your character? And so I think that the follow up at the end of the game, which was the biggest thing for me, because I feel like it's role playing. It's just a
Yeah.
different scenario, it's a different system, but you're role playing. So in a lot of ways, to me, it's similar in that way. But what was so different was at the end, whenever Matt, the light keeper, asked them, all of the questions. They all got these little pieces of paper that all asked certain questions, and then at the end of it, they had a tally. And with the tally, um, they get group benefits,
Yep.
and they have to kind of figure out how they use them, or if they use them, or if they hold off and they use them for the next game.
That's right. Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool because there was this baked in questionnaire at the end, because you know
Yep.
what? They have a set goal they're trying to achieve, and did you achieve it?
And like the questions were like there were general ones that I think they were called the illumination questions. So it was like, did you contain or destroy a source of bleed, which they did? Did they comfort someone or support somebody that was been affected by this? They did. Um,
Yes.
did they bring something back to the group? Bring something back to Candela Obscura? They did. And then there were individual things beyond what the group had to do, right? Like you were saying, there were things that their character had to do. So, like, there was, I think somebody had to make a deal, somebody had to mentor an ally,
Yeah.
deceive
Yeah.
some, like, so there were things that they had to do. And then those resources, like, what's cool about those to me is they can use those to get some of their stuff back.
Yep.
But there's like, they have to use those over the course of maybe the next mission or two. Like, they don't know if they're going to be able to get more of these. So it's not like you can just hoard a pile of health potions type of thing. Like, you have to
Right.
figure out, like, how do I spend? What do I need to spend? And some of them make your dice come back. Some of them change where you put your dice. One of the other mechanics that I really liked is when you are taking these wounds, I think. I have to go
Mm-hmm.
back and look at their actual term, but like, if you
Stitch.
yeah, so like you have to at some point you may have to move uh from one category into another category, meaning like you may have been good at something and get to roll 3 dice, but once you've been affected so much it changes you, so now maybe
Yeah.
you move
That's
it
when
so
you
that
have
you're
the
better at
scar.
something else. Yeah, so you
Right.
have the scar that is affecting your mind, your body, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm
It's a
still kind of
lingering
putting all the
effect that
pieces
doesn't go
together. So
away. Yeah, and
yep.
alters your character permanently, which I
Yep.
think is really cool because, we're used to games where if you have a healer, or if you have, like, at the end of the game you get a rest and you're all good to go next round, but with this, you can take enough damage that it permanently alters your character.
Yeah, and do enough of those and your character's gone. But like, I think you're
Yeah.
right. Like, it's, and there are reasons why 5th edition and D&D has it baked in the way it does, but like, it is a little weird because hit points are really this whole, abstract thing. They don't necessarily always equal body damage and wounds. It might be other things. It's exhaustion. It's a lot of other stuff.
Right.
But like, it is a little weird that if you are down to 2 hit points and then you get a good night's sleep and you're back up to full the next day, right? Like, if you think about it,
Right.
so you have to really put that aside when you're playing a game like D&D because it's meant to be an abstraction. Whereas this, because it's not going on this hit point basis, so to speak, like, you can make it almost feel more realistic of like carrying on the wounds in a way that's baked into the game enough that it doesn't feel like it's breaking anything to do that. Like, it's designed to
Right.
be that,
Well, and
which I really
if
like.
and in the real world, if you receive enough trauma, you change permanently as a person.
Sure.
So it,
Yeah.
it definitely reflects that a little bit more, so that there's more character development in that way. And it can take one of your good attributes completely away and
Yeah.
redistribute that point somewhere else, showing how your character has changed. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
which, maybe we'll get to see. We didn't get to see that in the first game because, I think it's introductory, but we only have 3. So I'm wondering,
That's
when we get to see that actual mechanic kind of come into play.
I
Yep.
forgot I had these. So yeah, so
Yeah.
here's the for those of you that haven't got a chance to this. So here's those questions, and you've got the circle sheet, you've got advancement, the stitch, refresh, or train. So like you do this at the end of each one of your games, which is great. I think it works really well, and then they've got this guide that's also included in the thing. But here's an example of a character sheet, right? So like if you are doing things like if you're a scholar, like in this case, um, you know, the professor specialty, so you may be really good at focus, but not so good at some of the other things. And so like yeah, so it's really interesting the way this works. Then you get marks, and then you get enough marks, and you're going to get scars. And yeah, it's a well constructed way of having sort of a light rules game that
Right.
fits the story really well, and we're seeing it play out. Like it's not like we I learned more about the game after watching it, but
Right.
then once I saw this, it completely all made sense. Like it wasn't like it was so like it takes a while to learn other systems, and not throwing any shade at other systems. It's like there's a lot more rules in D&D that you work through, and you really lean on a good game master and a good group to help you out with that. But this seems like you play a session, you probably get it. Maybe you play two sessions, you really get it. Like because it
Yeah.
just seems to be pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
So
well, while we were watching it the first time, I had not. I think you had already looked through some of the materials in advance, and I hadn't. And I remember sitting there going, what in the world is even happening
hmm
right now? Like, what's a drive and what is a what? Like, and I'm like, I'm so confused. So I'm gonna just focus on the actual story that's being told, and then I'll
right,
go back later and I will look up what the rules are. Which is what I did. And then we had our introductory show on the rule system and the world and things of that nature. And so I think watching tonight, I'm so much better for me because I already have educated myself on how
yeah.
they're actually doing things, you know?
and
Um,
and it's also like again, I say this a lot on the show, so bear with me everybody, but like we're not watching a play, and we're not just watching improv. We're watching people do good improv acting as part of a role-playing game. It's the same game that we could all play. Now, we don't all have the budget for the costumes and the cameras, and maybe we don't have acting training and voice training the way that
whatever.
they've had, but they're yeah, exactly. But they're still playing the same game, right? Like
Yeah.
so I think it can't be said enough that we have to remember that while we're watching a story, they're also playing a game, and so really understanding more about the game can help you appreciate the story and what they're doing even more, because you can then understand the constraints in which they're telling the story. Because otherwise we could all just make up really cool stories if we're good storytellers, right? Like
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
doing this within a framework and making it work really really well. And I think sometimes those guidelines can make some really inspiring things happen when you're telling a story that's pretty exciting to watch. So I'm also really excited to see what's going on tonight, so I can hopefully understand a little bit more about what went into it, because I'm always kind of looking at it from a game master perspective too, just to see like what can I learn from this to use for our own games too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because, who says you have to stick completely to one thing? Again, there's
Mm-hmm.
no new ideas. There's new ways of putting things together and there's new ways of thinking of things, but everything's been done. It's just, how are you envisioning it to being
Yep.
done in your game? That makes it new and exciting and different. Um,
Yeah.
and so this is really probably one of the only times I've actually watched another system being played, really.
Yeah.
And so for me, if I'm too confused, it can be a turn off for me. But knowing the players already knowing like how great they are at what they're doing, that kept me engaged. And then the story was really what I focused on versus, their dice rolls and things like that. And then, again, I went back and was looking at everything later, and I was like, okay, all right, okay, I'll be more engaged with the gameplay version this go round, because now I know what they're doing. So, but I'm excited to kind of see what their next mission is. Augie gets left off at Reading Rainbow. It's not really Reading Rainbow, the Gilded Rainbow. Because we find out Augie doesn't, Augie's an orphan.
It's so good.
Well, your camera went out of focus.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, let's try again. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, it just says whatever, Brian. But we find out Augie is homeless for the most part and just kind of sleeps wherever he can. And so they really, they said, look, you'll have a room here for as long as you want to stay. And I'm like, yeah, who doesn't want to live in a bookstore? I would. Heck yeah. And so it kind of ends, and it's we'll get together again for our next session. Not our next session, but our next quest we have to go on. It doesn't like you. It said no.
Something's not happening.
It's okay.
Sorry, everybody. I'll just be fuzzy.
Well, at least we finished most of it anyways. So
I know. Yeah, this is a good
not
place.
Too long.
This is the bleed.
Right. This is your trauma. This is what you're taking away.
Yes.
Taking away from this talk we've just had.
Oh man. All right. Well, thanks for, keeping us going there at the end with that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I can talk.
Yes. That's good. That's, since this is part of what we're doing is talking. So that's good.
True.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We're going to let everybody go, and we'll get ready to watch. We got about 10 minutes left, and you don't need to see me out of focus, although it's probably better with me out of focus.
Oh, whatever.
Completely clear. So
Brian, take off that filter.
Yeah. It makes for a much better show. Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll catch you next time.
You.
Have a good night.